Evicted by her mother, she lived on the street until she became the owner of an empire. A millionaire changed everything. Do you love stories about love and overcoming challenges? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now enjoy this beautiful story. The November rain fell relentlessly over Marseille, turning the narrow cobblestone streets into mirrors that reflected a grey sky. Ella Baker huddled beneath the awning of a closed bakery, her thin jacket doing little to protect her from the biting wind that swept in from the Mediterranean. At 26, she had already learned that life had no obligation to be fair. 3 months had passed since her mother had locked the door of their small apartment and told her, with eyes as cold as the winter approaching, that she was no longer welcome. The reason? Ella had refused to marry the man her mother had chosen, a middle-aged butcher who smelled of raw meat and stale wine, who had offered a modest sum in exchange for a young wife. "You're an ungrateful fool," her mother had spat. "You think you're too good for an honest man? You'll see what the world does to proud girls like you." And she had seen. Oh, how she had seen. The first nights on the street had been terrifying. Ella had slept in doorways, in parks, under bridges. She had learned to recognize the dangerous ones by the way they walked, by the hunger in their eyes that had nothing to do with food. She had learned to make herself small, invisible, to survive on the scraps others discarded. But Ella Baker had something her mother had never understood, an unbreakable core of determination forged in the fires of a difficult childhood. While other homeless people descended into despair or addiction, Ella had made a decision. This would not be her ending. This was merely a terrible chapter, not the whole story. During the day, she walked through the wealthier neighborhoods, studying the shop windows, the cafes, the people who moved through life with such ease. She collected discarded newspapers from trash bins and read them cover to cover in library reading rooms, warming herself while absorbing knowledge about business, investment, technology. The librarians eventually recognized her and turned a blind eye to her obvious situation, perhaps moved by the intensity with which this thin, dirty girl devoured information. It was in one of those newspapers that she first read about Jacob Nelson. "American tech mogul expands European operations," the headline proclaimed. The article described how Jacob Nelson, at 34, had built a software empire worth billions and was now opening a regional headquarters in Marseille. The photograph showed a man with dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. There was something in his expression, not arrogance exactly, but a kind of controlled distance, as if he held the world at arm's length. Ella stared at that photograph for a long time, not with envy or resentment, but with curiosity. What kind of man builds an empire? What drives someone to reach so high? And more importantly, what scars do they carry that nobody sees? That evening, as the rain intensified, Ella made her way to the soup kitchen run by the Sisters of Mercy. Sister Marie, a tiny woman with surprisingly strong hands, ladled hot soup into Ella's bowl and studied her with concerned eyes. "You're different from the others," Sister Marie said quietly. "I've watched you these past weeks. You're not giving up, are you?" Ella met her gaze steadily. "No, sister, I'm just waiting for my moment." "What moment is that, child?" "I don't know yet, but I'll recognize it when it comes." Sister Marie smiled, a sad but knowing expression. "I believe you will, but Ella, be careful. The world is harder on women who refuse to surrender. It will test you in ways you cannot imagine." That night, Ella found shelter in an abandoned loading dock near the old port. She wrapped herself in cardboard and newspapers, including the one with Jacob Nelson's photograph. As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, her last thought was about transformation, how a caterpillar must completely dissolve inside its chrysalis before it can become a butterfly. Perhaps she was dissolving too, breaking down so she could rebuild herself into something stronger. The morning brought unexpected opportunity. Ella was walking past the construction site of Nelson Tech's new headquarters when she noticed a well-dressed woman drop her phone. The device skittered across the pavement, landing dangerously close to a puddle. Without thinking, Ella rushed forward and retrieved it, wiping it carefully on her sleeve before handing it back. The woman, elegant, perhaps 50, with silver-grey hair cut in a precise bob, looked at Ella with surprise, then at her own phone, then back at Ella. "Thank you," she said, her accent marking her as American. "That phone contains my entire life." "Then you should be more careful with your entire life," Ella replied, then immediately regretted her boldness. But something made her continue. "I've learned that the things that matter most are usually the ones we guard least carefully." The woman's eyes sharpened with interest. "You speak excellent English, and that's quite a philosophical observation for—" She trailed off, clearly unsure how to politely reference Ella's obvious circumstances. "For someone who sleeps in doorways?" Ella finished for her, lifting her chin. "Poverty doesn't make you stupid, madame, only cold and hungry." To Ella's surprise, the woman laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. "I'm Charlotte Nelson. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Nelson Tech. And you're absolutely right. I apologize for my assumption." She studied Ella for a moment longer. "Are you looking for work?" Ella's heart began to pound, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm looking for opportunity. Work is just one form of it." Charlotte Nelson smiled. "We're opening our offices next week. We need people for everything from janitorial services to reception to data entry. The pay is fair and we provide training. If you're interested, come to this address tomorrow at 8 in the morning." She pulled a business card from her purse and pressed it into Ella's hand. "Ask for me specifically. Don't be late." After Charlotte walked away, Ella looked down at the card, her hands trembling. The address was for the new headquarters. The card was heavy, expensive, the kind of thing that spoke of success and stability. That night, Ella used her last few euros to access a public shower facility. She washed her hair 3 times, scrubbed her skin until it hurt, trying to remove not just the dirt, but the smell of the street that seemed to have seeped into her pores. She had one relatively clean outfit saved in her backpack, black pants and a white shirt she had bought from a charity shop before everything fell apart. At exactly 7:30 the next morning, Ella stood before the gleaming glass and steel building that housed Nelson Tech. Her reflection in the windows showed a thin young woman with damp hair pulled back severely, wearing clothes that were clean but obviously worn. She looked poor. She looked desperate. But her eyes burned with something that couldn't be dimmed by circumstance. They held determination, intelligence, and a fierce unwillingness to remain broken. Ella took a deep breath and walked through the doors into a lobby that smelled of new carpet and possibility. The security guard at the desk looked up, his expression already forming into dismissal. "I have an appointment with Charlotte Nelson," Ella said clearly, placing the business card on the counter. "My name is Ella Baker." The guard's expression changed as he examined the card, then made a phone call. Moments later, Charlotte herself appeared, extending her hand with a warm smile. "You came, and you're early. Good." Charlotte gestured toward the elevators. "Come with me. Let's talk about your future." As the elevator rose, Ella caught a glimpse of herself in the polished metal doors, a ghost of a girl rising up from the depths. She didn't know it yet, but the man whose name adorned this building, the man with the distant eyes in the newspaper photograph, would soon see that same reflection and recognize in it something he had lost in himself. Their story was about to begin, written in the language of transformation that only those who have truly fallen can understand. Charlotte Nelson led Ella through corridors that smelled of fresh paint and ambition. The offices were still being set up. Workers moved furniture, technicians installed computers, designers hung artwork on pristine white walls. Everything was new, clean, full of promise. "The janitorial position has been filled," Charlotte said as they walked, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "But I have something else in mind for you. Can you use a computer?" "Yes," Ella replied, remembering the hours she had spent in the library, teaching herself during those precious warm afternoons. "I'm familiar with most office software, spreadsheets, data management." Charlotte stopped walking and turned to face her. "How did someone who can do all that end up sleeping on the streets?" Ella met her gaze without flinching. Because I chose myself over what others wanted me to be. My mother expected obedience. I offered dignity instead. She chose to keep the obedience and discard the daughter. Something flickered in Charlotte's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. I understand that choice more than you might think. My brother, the man who owns this company, made a similar one many years ago. It cost him dearly, but it also made him who he is. She resumed walking. I'm going to start you in data entry, but Ella, I didn't bring you here out of charity. I brought you here because I saw something in your eyes. Don't make me regret it. I won't, Ella promised, and meant it with every fibre of her being. The work was monotonous, but Ella approached it like a woman dying of thirst approaches water. She arrived 30 minutes early every day and stayed late, volunteering for extra assignments, learning every system, every process. She spoke little to the other employees, who regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They could tell she was different. There was a hunger in her that made them uncomfortable, an intensity that set her apart. Within 2 weeks, Ella had moved from data entry to administrative assistance. Within a month, she was helping coordinate logistics for department meetings. She absorbed information like a sponge, anticipating needs before they were spoken, solving problems before they became crises. She also watched Jacob Nelson from a distance. He was rarely in the Marseille office. Most of his time was spent in Paris or London or Silicon Valley. But when he did appear, the entire building seemed to shift. Like a compass needle swinging toward magnetic north, people straightened, worked faster, spoke more carefully. Ella's first glimpse of him in person was on a Tuesday morning in December. She was organizing files in a conference room when he walked past with Charlotte and 3 other executives. Through the glass walls, she could see him clearly for the first time. The photograph in the newspaper hadn't captured the reality of him. Jacob Nelson was tall, lean, with the kind of contained energy that suggested he was always thinking 3 moves ahead. He wore his expensive suit like armor, his expression controlled and remote. But it was his eyes that caught Ella's attention. Dark and intelligent, yes, but also profoundly tired, as if he carried weight that no amount of success could lift. As the group passed, Jacob glanced into the conference room. His gaze swept past Ella, then returned, holding for just a moment. In that brief connection, Ella felt as if she were being evaluated, catalogued, assessed. Then he was gone, moving down the hallway, and she was left with her heart beating faster than it should. "That's him," whispered Marie, one of the other assistants who had appeared at Ella's elbow. "They say he's brilliant but impossible to work for. Demanding, perfectionist, never satisfied. They also say he never sleeps, never socializes, just works constantly, like he's running from something." Ella said nothing, but she understood that feeling more than Marie could possibly know. She too was running, away from her past, toward something she couldn't yet name. The winter deepened, and with it, Ella's position in the company strengthened. Charlotte had become something of a mentor, teaching her not just about business, but about strategy, negotiation, the unspoken rules of corporate life. In return, Ella proved herself invaluable, organized, discreet, brilliant at solving the small problems that could derail larger plans. She had also managed to find housing, a tiny studio apartment in a marginal neighborhood, but it was hers, with a real bed and a door that locked. Sometimes she woke in the night, momentarily disoriented, expecting to find herself on cold pavement. Then she would remember. She had done it. She had climbed up from nothing. But she wasn't satisfied. Not yet. It was early January when everything changed. Charlotte called Ella into her office with an expression that mixed excitement and concern. "Jacob needs a new executive assistant," Charlotte said without preamble. "His last one quit yesterday, apparently couldn't handle the pressure. The position is crucial, Ella. He needs someone who can anticipate his needs, manage his schedule, coordinate with departments across multiple countries, handle sensitive information with absolute discretion." Ella's pulse quickened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm recommending you for the position." The words hung in the air between them. This was more than a job opportunity. It was a transformation, a leap from the bottom to a position of real influence and responsibility. "I've only been here 3 months," Ella said carefully. "There are others with more experience, more credentials," Charlotte interrupted. "Perhaps, but credentials don't tell me who will succeed. I've watched you, Ella. You don't just complete tasks. You understand the why behind them. You see patterns. You think strategically. And most importantly, you're not intimidated by power or success. You've survived worse than a demanding boss." "What does Mr. Nelson think of this recommendation?" Charlotte smiled slightly. "He trusts my judgment. But he'll interview you himself, of course. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, his office. Prepare to be challenged. Jacob doesn't hire people who tell him what he wants to hear. He hires people who tell him what he needs to know." That night, Ella barely slept. She prepared obsessively, researching every aspect of Nelson Tech's operations, memorizing recent deals and developments, thinking through potential questions and her responses. But beneath the professional preparation was something more personal. A recognition that this opportunity represented more than career advancement. It represented a chance to prove that her mother had been wrong, that choosing dignity over obedience had been the right decision, that she was worth more than the price a butcher had offered. The next morning, Ella stood before the door to Jacob Nelson's office, her hand raised to knock. She wore her best outfit, still inexpensive but clean and professional. Her hair was pulled back, her expression calm despite the storm of nerves in her stomach. She knocked. "Come in," said a voice from within, deep, controlled, carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to command. Ella entered. The office was surprisingly sparse. No ego wall of photographs or awards, no expensive art chosen for display. Just floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive desk covered with papers and computer screens, and Jacob Nelson himself, standing with his back to her, looking out at Marseille. "You're Ella Baker," he said without turning around. "Charlotte's protégée, the woman who went from homeless to irreplaceable in 90 days. So he knew. Of course he knew. Ella lifted her chin. "Yes, sir." He turned then, and the full force of his attention hit her like a physical thing. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadow of exhaustion beneath his composed exterior, the barely perceptible tension in his jaw that spoke of constant vigilance. "Tell me why you think you can do this job," he said, moving to sit behind his desk, gesturing for her to take the chair opposite. Ella sat, meeting his gaze directly. "Because I understand what it means to build something from nothing. Because I know how to work when everything is against you. Because I don't need to be comfortable, I need to be useful. And because I'm not here to make your life easier, Mr. Nelson, I'm here to help you build your empire better." For the first time, something shifted in Jacob Nelson's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening of the rigid control he maintained. "Everyone else who's interviewed has promised to make my life easier," he said quietly. "You're the first person honest enough to admit that's not the goal." "The goal," Ella replied, "is excellence. Everything else is just a means to that end." Jacob leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark, tired eyes. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. "Myself, 12 years ago, when I was building my first company with nothing but a laptop and conviction." He paused. "It was brutal. It nearly destroyed me. And when I finally succeeded, I realized the thing I'd built couldn't fill the hole I was trying to fill." The confession was unexpected, intimate in a way that seemed unlike him. Ella recognized it for what it was, a test, to see if she would exploit vulnerability or respect it. "Then perhaps," she said carefully, "the question isn't what you're building, but why you're building it." Jacob's eyes sharpened. "And what would you know about that?" "I know what it's like to prove your worth to people who will never value you. I know what it's like to run from pain by staying in constant motion. I know what it's like to achieve things that should make you proud but somehow just leave you more empty." The silence that followed was profound. In that moment, something passed between them. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Two people who had climbed up from darkness, who carried scars they showed to no one, who understood that success and healing were not the same thing. "The job is yours," Jacob said abruptly. "Start Monday. The hours are terrible, the demands are unreasonable, and I'm difficult to work for. But Charlotte believes in you, and I trust her judgment. Don't make either of us regret it." Ella stood, extending her hand across the desk. Jacob shook it, his grip firm, his skin warm, the contact lasting just a moment longer than professionally necessary. As she left his office, Ella felt the world tilt on its axis. She had just stepped into the orbit of a man who could change everything. What she didn't yet know was that she was about to change him just as profoundly. Working as Jacob Nelson's executive assistant was like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Everything moved at impossible speed, and the slightest mistake could have catastrophic consequences. Ella thrived in it. Her days began at 6 in the morning and rarely ended before 9 at night. She managed Jacob's schedule across 4 time zones, coordinated with executives in 7 countries, prepared briefings for board meetings, and handled a constant avalanche of decisions that required immediate attention. She learned to read his moods from the tension in his shoulders, to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, to know when to push back and when to simply execute. What surprised her most was that he listened to her. When she suggested a more efficient system for reviewing contract proposals, he implemented it. When she pointed out that his aggressive acquisition strategy was exhausting his leadership team, he actually moderated the pace. When she gently noted that he hadn't eaten lunch in 3 days, he started keeping protein bars in his desk drawer. "You're managing me," he said one evening in late February, looking up from his computer screen with an expression that might have been amusement. They were alone in his office, the city lights of Marseille glittering beyond the windows. The rest of the building had emptied hours ago, but they remained, as they so often did, working through problems that couldn't wait until morning. "I'm supporting you," Ella corrected, not looking up from the presentation she was finalizing. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Managing implies control. I'm not trying to control you, Mr. Nelson. I'm trying to create space for you to do what you do best without the burden of everything else." Jacob set down his pen and studied her. 3 months of working closely together had created a strange intimacy between them. Not romantic, not yet, but something deeper than a typical professional relationship. They had learned each other's rhythms, developed a wordless communication that allowed them to work with extraordinary efficiency. "You're the only person in my life who isn't afraid of me," he said quietly. Ella finally looked up, meeting his gaze. "I'm not afraid of you because I understand you. You're not actually intimidating, Mr. Nelson. You're just in pain, and you've learned to use intensity as armor." The words hung between them, dangerously honest. For a moment, Jacob's carefully maintained control faltered, and Ella saw something raw in his expression: surprise, recognition, and a profound loneliness. "Don't," he said, his voice rough. "Don't psychoanalyze me, Ella. I'm not psychoanalyzing you. I'm just seeing you. There's a difference." Jacob stood abruptly, moving to the windows, his back to her. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you had a brother who died," Ella said quietly. "I know it happened when you were 19, and that your parents blamed you for it somehow. I know you built this entire empire trying to prove you were worth saving. And I know that no matter how successful you become, you still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced you're worthless." The silence was deafening. Jacob's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Charlotte told you," he said flatly. "Charlotte told me nothing. But I've watched you, Mr. Nelson. I've seen the way you drive yourself past any reasonable limit, the way you never celebrate successes, only move immediately to the next challenge, the way you look at your achievements like they're evidence against you rather than for you." Ella stood, moving closer but keeping distance between them. "I recognize it because I do the same thing. I work obsessively because if I stop, I'll have to face the fact that my own mother chose to destroy me rather than accept me. So yes, I understand your pain." I'm living a version of it myself. Jacob turned then, and the expression on his face was devastating. All the walls stripped away, showing the wounded person beneath the successful exterior. My brother didn't die, he said hoarsely. He killed himself, and he did it because of me. The confession landed like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples through everything Ella thought she understood. She didn't move, didn't speak, just let him continue. Michael was my older brother. Brilliant, charismatic, the pride of our family. I was the disappointing one, mediocre grades, no athletic ability, socially awkward. When I was 19, I invented a software algorithm that turned out to be revolutionary. A major tech company offered me $10 million for it. $10 million, Ella, life-changing money for our struggling family. Jacob's voice cracked, but he pressed on. Michael had been trying to launch his own startup for 5 years. He'd begged investors, maxed out credit cards, poured everything into his dream, and it was failing. When I got my offer, he asked me to invest in his company instead of selling to the tech firm. Said my algorithm could be the foundation of something even bigger if we built it together. Ella could see where this was going, and her heart broke for him. I refused, Jacob continued. I was 19 and terrified and sick of being the family disappointment. I wanted to prove I was worth something on my own, so I sold the algorithm, and Michael's company collapsed 2 months later. He hanged himself in his apartment, and in his note, he wrote that I'd had a choice. I could save his dream or pursue my own, and I'd chosen myself. My parents have never forgiven me. They look at me and see the son who killed their favorite child. Tears streamed down Jacob's face, the first emotion Ella had ever seen him display openly. She moved to him without thinking, closing the distance between them, and did something she'd never dared before. She took his hands in hers. "You didn't kill your brother," she said firmly. "He made a choice born from pain and desperation, but it was his choice, not yours. You had every right to pursue your own path. What happened to Michael is a tragedy, but it's not your fault. Your parents are wrong. They're grieving, and they've chosen to blame you rather than face the complexity of mental illness and suicide. But their narrative is not the truth." Jacob looked down at their joined hands, his expression raw. "I've built all of this. Billions of dollars, hundreds of employees, technology that's changed industries, and I still can't shake the feeling that I'm fundamentally selfish. That success only proves how willing I am to sacrifice others for my own ambition." "No," Ella said softly. "You're not selfish, Jacob. You're traumatized. There's a difference. You've been punishing yourself for 12 years for a crime you didn't commit. And all this work, all this success, it's not ambition, it's penance. You're trying to earn forgiveness from people who will never give it." The use of his first name shifted something between them. Jacob's eyes met hers, and in that moment Ella saw him fully. Not the billionaire, not the demanding boss, but the broken 19-year-old who had lost everything the moment he gained everything. "How do you stop?" he whispered. "How do you stop running?" "I don't know yet," Ella admitted. "But maybe we can figure it out together." The moment stretched, charged with possibility. Then Jacob stepped back, gently extracting his hands from hers, rebuilding his walls with visible effort. "We should finish the presentation," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "The board meeting is tomorrow." Ella recognized the retreat for what it was, not rejection, but self-protection. She nodded, returning to her chair, and they worked in silence for another hour. But something fundamental had shifted between them, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface, creating new geography that would take time to explore. In the weeks that followed, their relationship evolved in subtle ways. Jacob still drove himself relentlessly, but he occasionally accepted Ella's suggestions to delegate or take breaks. He asked her opinion on matters beyond scheduling and logistics, genuinely considering her insights. And sometimes, late at night when they were alone in the office, he would share fragments of himself, stories about Michael, about his parents, about the loneliness of success. Ella shared too, carefully, in small doses. She told him about her mother, about the butcher, about the particular shame of being discarded by someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally. She described the cold nights on the street, the fear, the determination that had kept her moving forward. "You're extraordinary," Jacob said one evening in March, the words simple but weighted with meaning. "No," Ella replied. "I'm just ordinary in extraordinary circumstances, like you." He smiled then, a real smile, not the polished corporate expression he wore for the world, but something genuine and warm that transformed his entire face. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he admitted. The statement hung between them, carrying implications neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Because somewhere in the process of working together, of sharing vulnerabilities, of witnessing each other's pain and strength, something deeper had begun growing. Not the fairy tale romance of a millionaire and his assistant, but something more profound. Two wounded people recognizing in each other the possibility of healing. But healing, like transformation, is rarely linear, and the forces that had shaped them both were not ready to release their hold without a fight. The crisis came on a Tuesday in late April. Jacob's mother called, the first contact in over a year, asking him to come to Lyon for his father's 70th birthday. The family would be gathering, she said coolly, and it would look poorly if he didn't attend. Jacob agreed, his face carefully blank. But Ella saw the tremor in his hands as he ended the call, the way his jaw clenched with barely controlled emotion. "You don't have to go," she said quietly. "Yes, I do. If I don't, it's just more evidence that I'm the selfish one, the son who abandoned the family. Or you could simply recognize that you're not obligated to submit yourself to people who hurt you." Jacob looked at her, really looked at her, and Ella saw the war being waged behind his eyes. Duty versus self-preservation, the desire for reconciliation versus the need for protection. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "What? Come to Lyon with me. As my—" he hesitated. "As my colleague, as support. I can't face them alone, Ella. I'll fall apart." It was the most vulnerable request he'd ever made of her, and Ella recognized the trust it represented. She also recognized the danger. Attending a family gathering would blur the lines of their professional relationship even further, would create intimacy that might be difficult to navigate afterward. But when she looked at Jacob's face, saw the desperate hope mixed with fear, she knew there was only one answer she could give. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll come with you." Relief flooded his expression, followed quickly by something else. Gratitude, yes, but also something warmer, something that made Ella's heart beat faster. They were stepping into dangerous territory, crossing boundaries that professional relationships shouldn't cross. But perhaps, Ella thought, that was the only way forward. Perhaps healing required breaking rules, taking risks, allowing yourself to be vulnerable with someone who understood your particular brand of brokenness. The trip to Lyon would change everything. Neither of them knew it yet, but the careful dance they'd been performing was about to end, and what came next would either destroy them both or forge them into something neither could have become alone. Lyon was beautiful in early May, with its Renaissance architecture glowing golden in the spring sunlight, and the Saône River reflecting clouds like a moving painting. But as their car approached the Nelson family home in the prestigious Croix-Rousse district, Jacob's tension was palpable. "They'll hate you," he said abruptly, staring out the window. "They'll see you as proof that I've replaced them, that I've built a life that doesn't include the family." "I'm not here to make them like me," Ella replied calmly. "I'm here to remind you who you really are when they try to tell you otherwise." Jacob's hand found hers on the seat between them, squeezing briefly before releasing. It was the first time he'd initiated physical contact since that night in the office, and the gesture sent electricity through Ella's entire body. She was in dangerous territory. Her feelings for Jacob had evolved beyond professional respect into something she was afraid to name. The Nelson home was an elegant 19th-century townhouse with wrought-iron balconies and a courtyard garden. Jacob's mother answered the door, a thin woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes exactly like her son's, except where his held exhaustion and hidden pain. Hers held cold judgment. "Jacob," she said, not moving to embrace him. Then her gaze shifted to Ella, cataloguing her inexpensive dress, her simple jewelry, her obvious discomfort. "And this is Ella Baker, my executive assistant," Jacob said, his voice carefully neutral. "I asked her to accompany me." "How professional of you." The words were coated in disapproval. "Your father is in the salon. The family is already here." The gathering was precisely as awful as Ella had anticipated. Jacob's father, a stern man with the air of disappointed nobility, barely acknowledged his son. Two aunts whispered behind their hands, their eyes constantly returning to Jacob with expressions of poorly concealed disdain. Several cousins made polite conversation that felt like small cuts, each question designed to emphasize Jacob's absence from family life. And then there was the shrine. In the main salon, prominently displayed on the mantelpiece, was a collection of photographs of Michael. Michael as a child, Michael at university, Michael receiving some award, Michael smiling with that charismatic confidence Jacob had described. Beside the photos was a small table with fresh flowers and a framed copy of Michael's obituary. Jacob stopped in front of it, his entire body rigid. Ella moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone. "We keep his memory alive," Jacob's mother said, appearing at his other side. "Some of us believe that's important, even if others prefer to pretend he never existed." "I've never pretended Michael didn't exist," Jacob said quietly, his voice strained. "I think about him every single day." "Do you? Is that why you've missed every anniversary of his death? Why you never visit his grave? Why you built your empire and forgot the family you came from?" Ella felt Jacob begin to shake beside her. She could see him fracturing, the walls he'd built beginning to crumble under the weight of his mother's accusation, and something in her snapped. "With respect, Mrs. Nelson," Ella said, her voice clear and firm, "your son didn't forget his family. He survived the only way he knew how after you made it clear he was responsible for a tragedy that was never his fault." The room went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward her. Jacob's mother's face flushed with anger. "How dare you? How dare you?" Ella interrupted, her years of being dismissed and degraded giving her courage she didn't know she possessed. "Your son built something extraordinary from nothing. He employs hundreds of people. He creates technology that helps millions. He gives generously to charitable causes. He's brilliant and kind, and he works himself to exhaustion trying to prove he deserves to exist. And instead of celebrating him, instead of being proud of what he's overcome, you've spent 12 years punishing him for the crime of surviving when Michael didn't." "You know nothing about this family," Jacob's father said coldly, standing from his chair. "Nothing about what we lost." "I know what it's like to be rejected by your own parent," Ella replied, turning to face him. "I know what it's like to be told you're worthless, that you don't deserve love or belonging. My mother threw me out because I refused to marry a man she chose for me. I slept on the streets for months. I know exactly what your son has felt every day of his life since Michael died. The crushing weight of being alive when someone you love isn't, and the agony of knowing that the people who should love you unconditionally have decided you're not worth their forgiveness." Tears were streaming down Ella's face now, but her voice remained steady. Michael's death was a tragedy, but it wasn't Jacob's fault. Mental illness and suicide are complex, painful realities that have nothing to do with one person's career decision, and the fact that you've weaponized your grief to torture your surviving son for 12 years isn't honoring Michael's memory. It's destroying another life in service to your own pain. The silence that followed was absolute. Jacob stood frozen beside her, his face pale. His mother looked as if she'd been slapped. Then unexpectedly, Jacob's father spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "You think we don't know that?" He moved to the window, his back to the room. "You think we haven't questioned ourselves every single day? When your child takes his own life, you look for reasons for someone to blame because the alternative, that it was meaningless, that nothing could have prevented it, is unbearable. He turned, and Ella saw tears in the older man's eyes. Jacob was easier to blame than ourselves. He was young, successful, still here. We could be angry at him, instead of drowning in our own guilt for not seeing Michael's pain, for not getting him help, for failing him in ways we'll never fully understand. "Robert," Jacob's mother whispered, her own composure cracking. "No, Marguerite, this young woman is right. We've been cruel. We've used our grief as an excuse to punish Jacob for the simple fact of being alive. We've told ourselves he was selfish, that he chose money over family because it was easier than admitting we failed both our sons, one we couldn't save and one we deliberately wounded." Jacob made a sound, half sob, half gasp, and his father crossed the room, pulling him into an embrace. For a moment Jacob stood rigid, unable to accept the gesture. Then he collapsed into his father's arms, 12 years of held pain finally breaking free. "I'm sorry," Robert Nelson said, his voice breaking. "God, Jacob, I'm so sorry. You didn't kill your brother. We should never have made you carry that burden." Jacob's mother stood frozen, watching her husband and surviving son, her face a battlefield of emotions. Then slowly, tentatively, she moved toward them, her hand reaching out to touch Jacob's shoulder. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," Jacob said hoarsely, pulling back from his father's embrace. "You've hurt me too deeply, but maybe we can start trying to understand each other." "That's all we can ask," his father replied. The birthday dinner that followed was awkward, punctuated by long silences and careful conversations. But something had shifted. The extended family, having witnessed the confrontation, treated Jacob with more genuine warmth. Small stories were shared about Michael, not just the idealized version displayed in the shrine, but the real person with flaws and humor and complicated dreams. Later, as the evening wound down, Jacob and Ella stood in the courtyard garden under a sky full of stars. The scent of jasmine filled the air, and somewhere nearby, water trickled in a fountain. "You didn't have to do that," Jacob said quietly. "Defend me like that." "Yes, I did, because someone needed to say what you couldn't say yourself." He turned to face her, and in the moonlight, his expression was raw and open in a way she'd never seen. "Ella, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Feel this way about someone. Let someone see me this completely. Want someone this much and be terrified of what that means." Ella's breath caught. "Jacob, I know it's complicated. You work for me, which makes any personal relationship ethically questionable. And I'm damaged, Ella. I'm broken in ways I'm not sure can be fixed. I have nightmares about Michael. I wake up panicking that I've forgotten something crucial. I work obsessively because stopping means thinking, and thinking means remembering all the ways I've failed." "You haven't failed," Ella said firmly, moving closer to him. "You've survived. You've built something meaningful. You've created value and opportunity for hundreds of people. Those aren't failures, Jacob. Those are victories." "Then why do I still feel empty?" "Because success alone doesn't heal trauma. Money doesn't fill the hole that rejection creates. You've been trying to earn worth through achievement, but worth isn't something you earn. It's something you already have, something that can't be taken away no matter what anyone says or does." Jacob reached out, his hand cupping her face with devastating gentleness. "How did you get so wise? The same way you got so strong, by surviving things that should have destroyed us." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers, and they stood that way for a long moment, not quite kissing, but sharing breath and space and the profound intimacy of being truly seen. "I don't want you to be my assistant anymore," Jacob whispered. Pain lanced through Ella's chest. "You're firing me." "No." He pulled back slightly, his eyes intense. "I want you to be my partner, not just in work, but in building something better. I'm creating a new division of the company, focused on social enterprise, on using technology to address poverty and housing insecurity. I want you to run it." Ella stared at him, stunned. "Jacob, I don't have the experience. You have something better. You have first-hand understanding of the problems we're trying to solve." You know what it's like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to fight for dignity in a system designed to keep you down. That's worth more than any business degree. This is too much. You're offering this because of your feelings, not because I'm offering this because you're brilliant, Jacob interrupted, because in 6 months you've proven yourself more capable than executives I've worked with for years, because you see connections and possibilities that others miss, because you care about people, not just profit. He paused. My feelings for you are separate from my professional judgment, though I admit they're becoming harder to separate. A laugh bubbled up from Ella's chest, slightly hysterical. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two wounded people trying to heal each other. Maybe that's exactly what we need. Maybe we can't heal alone. And if we fail, if this, whatever this is between us, destroys what we've built professionally, then we fail spectacularly and start over. But Ella, I'm tired of living in fear of failure. I've spent 12 years building walls to protect myself from more pain, and all it's done is make me lonely. You've shown me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that letting someone see your scars doesn't mean they'll use them against you. Ella felt tears prick her eyes. My mother would say I'm being foolish, that I'm risking everything I've gained for romantic notions. Your mother was wrong about you, just like my parents were wrong about me. We're not defined by other people's judgments or limitations. We're defined by the choices we make and the courage we show in making them. When did you become so philosophical? Ella asked, smiling through her tears. About an hour ago, when I watched you fearlessly tell my family the truths I've never been brave enough to speak. You changed my life tonight, Ella. You gave me back a part of myself I thought was lost forever. He kissed her then, softly, carefully, as if she were something precious that might break. It was nothing like the passionate kisses described in romance novels, but it was everything Ella had never known she needed. It was gentle and tentative and honest, a promise more than a possession, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying and laughing simultaneously. So, Jacob said, wiping tears from his cheeks with an embarrassed smile. Should we discuss the operational structure of this new social enterprise division, or should we continue to ignore all professional boundaries? Why not both? Ella replied, taking his hand. We've never been particularly good at following conventional rules. They walked back into the house together, and though the evening that followed was still awkward, still marked by the ghosts of past pain, something fundamental had changed. Jacob spoke with his parents, really spoke, not just exchanged pleasantries. Plans were tentatively made for future contact. Apologies were offered and cautiously accepted. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation. There would be months, probably years of careful rebuilding required, but it was a beginning, made possible by Ella's courage and Jacob's willingness to finally be vulnerable. As they drove back to Marseille in the early hours of morning, exhausted but lighter somehow, Jacob reached across the seat and took Ella's hand. Thank you, he said simply, for seeing me, for fighting for me, for believing I was worth defending. Always, Ella replied, squeezing his hand. We're in this together now. Whatever comes next, we face it as partners. Neither of them knew that what comes next would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But for now, driving through the French countryside as dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, they allowed themselves to simply be two people who had found each other in the darkness and decided to walk toward the light together. 6 months after the confrontation in Lyon, Ella stood in the conference room of Nelson Tech's Marseille headquarters, presenting to a room full of investors and board members. The presentation was titled Nelson Social Ventures, Technology as a Tool for Human Dignity, and it represented everything she had learned both from her own experience and from Jacob's mentorship. Traditional charity creates dependency, Ella said, her voice clear and confident. What we're proposing is different. We're creating technology platforms that empower people experiencing poverty to build their own solutions, microloan applications connected to skills training. Housing placement systems that protect dignity while providing support, job-matching algorithms that look beyond traditional credentials to recognize transferable skills and determination. She clicked to the next slide, which showed projected impact numbers. In our pilot program in Marseille, we've placed 47 formerly homeless individuals into stable employment. Our technology identified skills they'd developed through survival, resourcefulness, problem-solving under pressure, ability to navigate complex systems, and matched them with employers looking for exactly those qualities. Charlotte Nelson, now serving as the division's advisory board chair, smiled with undisguised pride. Jacob, sitting at the back of the room, watched Ella with an expression that mixed professional respect with something far more personal. The presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause. Investors asked sharp questions, which Ella answered with the same combination of pragmatism and passion that had defined her approach from the beginning. When the meeting finally ended, she felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. "You were magnificent," Jacob said, approaching her as the room emptied. "Though I'm not surprised. You're always magnificent." Despite 6 months of their relationship evolving from professional to personal, Ella still felt her cheeks flush at his praise. They had been careful, moving slowly, building trust, learning each other's patterns of healing and retreat. There had been difficult moments, nights when Jacob's nightmares about Michael left him shaking and withdrawn, days when Ella's old fear of abandonment made her pull away defensively. But they had persisted, choosing each other again and again, learning that love wasn't about perfection, but about commitment to growth. "The board approved full funding," Charlotte said, joining them with a tablet displaying the approval documents. "You're officially launching next month, Ella. You're going to change lives." "We're going to change lives," Ella corrected. "None of this happens without the team, without your guidance, without Jacob's vision and resources." "Always so humble," Charlotte said, but her eyes were warm. "Take the credit you deserve, dear. You've earned it." After Charlotte left, Jacob moved closer, his hand finding Ella's in the way that had become natural between them. "Walk with me," he asked. They took the elevator down to the ground floor and walked out into the warm October afternoon. Marseille was beautiful in autumn, the Mediterranean air carrying the scent of sea salt and dried herbs. They walked without destination, simply enjoying being together outside the intensity of work. "I have something to show you," Jacob said, guiding her toward a neighborhood near the old port. They walked through narrow streets until they reached a renovated building with a gleaming new facade. Above the entrance, a sign read, "Maison de l'Espoir, Nelson Social Ventures Community Center." Ella stopped, staring. "Jacob, what is this?" "Your headquarters," he replied, pulling out a key. "Come see." And inside, the building had been transformed into a beautiful, welcoming space. There were training rooms equipped with computers, a commercial kitchen for culinary job training, meeting spaces designed for dignity and privacy, and offices for case managers and counselors. Everything was high quality but warm, designed to say, "You matter, your potential matters, your future matters." "The second floor has apartments," Jacob continued, leading her up a staircase. "Transitional housing for people in your programs, 6 months to a year of stable shelter while they rebuild their lives. And the third floor," he opened a door, revealing a stunning penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Mediterranean. "Is for you, if you want it." Ella turned to face him, emotions overwhelming her ability to speak. "I know you have your studio," Jacob said quickly, "and this isn't about me trying to control you or make you dependent on me. You can keep your place, you can sell this, you can do whatever you want. But Ella, you built something extraordinary from nothing, and I wanted you to have something extraordinary to show for it. You deserve beauty in your life. You deserve to look out at the sea every morning and remember how far you've come." Tears streamed down Ella's face. "This is too much." "It's not nearly enough. Ella, you saved my life. Not with grand gestures, but with truth and courage, and by refusing to let me hide from myself. You showed me that healing is possible, that family can be rebuilt, that success means nothing without connection and purpose. He took both her hands in his. I'm not the same man I was a year ago. I sleep better. I laugh more. I've reconciled with my parents. We have dinner once a month now, and while it's not perfect, it's real. I've stopped using work as a way to avoid feeling and started using it as a way to create meaning. And all of that is because you saw something in me worth defending. You did the same for me, Ella whispered. When everyone else saw just another homeless person, you saw potential. When I doubted myself, you believed in me. When I was afraid to take up space, you built me an empire. We built it together, Jacob corrected gently. That's what partners do. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Ella's breath caught. I'm not proposing marriage, Jacob said quickly. Not yet. We're both still learning how to be in a healthy relationship, and I don't want to rush something this important. But I am proposing something else. He opened the box, revealing 2 matching rings, simple, elegant bands. A promise, he said, that whatever comes, we face it together. That we're committed to choosing each other, to growing together, to building something that honors both our scars and our strengths. That we're partners in business, in healing, in life. Ella looked at the rings, then at Jacob's face. This man who had been a stranger in a newspaper photograph a year ago, who had become her employer, her friend, her confidant, and finally her love. She thought about the girl who had slept on cold pavement, who had believed she was worthless because her own mother had discarded her, and she thought about the woman she had become, strong, capable, building something meaningful in the world. Yes, she said simply, to all of it. Yes. Jacob slipped one ring onto her finger, and she took the other, sliding it onto his hand. They stood there in the empty apartment, holding each other as the afternoon sun painted everything gold. 2 people who had found each other in darkness and chosen to walk into light together. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The Maison de l'Espoir opened to immediate success, with more applicants than they could initially accommodate. Ella's team worked tirelessly, and she found herself becoming not just an administrator, but a mentor to others who had experienced what she had. She shared her story openly now, no longer ashamed of where she had been, recognizing that her past gave her unique insight into the present. Jacob continued to transform. He hired a therapist and began processing his grief over Michael properly. He set boundaries around work hours and started pursuing hobbies: photography, sailing, cooking. He smiled more freely, laughed more often. The tired, haunted look that had characterized him a year ago had been replaced by something lighter, more open. His relationship with his parents continued to heal slowly. They would never fully recover what had been lost, but they were building something new, honest, complicated, real. His mother had even visited the Maison de l'Espoir and quietly donated a significant sum to support the work, her way of acknowledging the good her son was doing. On a crisp December evening, exactly 1 year after Ella had first walked into Nelson Tech as a desperate job applicant, Jacob organized a celebration. The entire building was filled with employees, program participants, and community partners. Music played, food was abundant, and the atmosphere was joyful. Ella moved through the crowd, talking with people whose lives had been changed by the programs they had created together. There was Marie, who had been sleeping in her car with 3 children and now had stable housing and a job in data analysis. There was Ahmed, a refugee who had used the job placement platform to find work that utilized his engineering background. There was Sophie, once addicted and homeless, now 6 months sober and training to become a peer counselor. Each story was a miracle, small, quiet, profound. Jacob found Ella standing alone on the balcony, looking out at the lights of Marseille. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into him, feeling safe and loved in a way she had never imagined possible. "Happy anniversary," he murmured against her hair. "Anniversary of what?" "Of you walking into my building and changing everything. of me finally understanding that success without connection is just expensive loneliness, of us finding each other. Ella turned in his arms, looking up at his face. "Do you know what I'm most grateful for?" she asked. "What?" "That we were both broken when we met. Because if we'd been whole, comfortable, we never would have had the courage to do this, to build something real, to face our pain, to choose transformation over safety." Jacob smiled, that beautiful, genuine smile that still took her breath away. "So our scars became our gift, yes. Not despite what we suffered, but because of what we learned from suffering. We learned empathy. We learned resilience. We learned that rock bottom is actually the perfect foundation for building something beautiful." "I love you," Jacob said, the words still new enough to carry weight, to feel like a gift each time they were spoken. "Not because you saved me, but because you saw me, and you loved me anyway." "I love you too," Ella replied. "Not because you rescued me from the streets, but because you saw my potential and helped me see it in myself." They kissed as fireworks began to burst over the old port. Someone in the building had arranged a surprise display. The sky lit up with gold and silver and blue, and below them the celebration continued, full of laughter and music and hope. 1 year ago, Ella Baker had been sleeping on cold pavement, convinced she was worthless. Jacob Nelson had been drowning in success that meant nothing, running from grief he couldn't face. Now they stood together, having built not just a successful company division, but a partnership that healed them both. Their journey hadn't been easy. There would still be difficult days ahead. Trauma doesn't disappear just because you fall in love. But they had learned the most important lesson. Healing isn't about becoming undamaged. It's about learning to carry your scars with grace, to transform pain into purpose, to find beauty in the broken places. As the fireworks continued to light up the December sky, Ella thought about all the people sleeping rough in Marseille that night. People like she had been. People who thought their stories were over. Tomorrow, the Maison de l'Espoir would open its doors to more of them, offering not charity but partnership, not pity but recognition of inherent dignity and potential. This was her empire now, not built on money or power, but on the simple revolutionary idea that every person carries worth that cannot be taken away by circumstance, that transformation is always possible, that love, for yourself, for others, is the only thing that truly heals. "Ready to go back inside?" Jacob asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "In a minute," Ella replied, wanting to hold on to this moment a little longer. The view from up here was extraordinary. The city spread out below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars, the sea dark and vast beyond. She had come so far. They both had. When they finally returned to the celebration, hand in hand, Ella caught Charlotte's eye across the room. The older woman raised her glass in a silent toast, her smile saying, "I knew you were special from the moment you saved my phone. You've proven me right in ways I couldn't have imagined." Ella raised her own glass in return, a gesture of gratitude for the woman who had given her that first chance. Then she turned to Jacob, to the life they were building together, to the future full of possibility. 1 year ago, she had been evicted by her mother and left to survive on the street. Now she was co-building an empire dedicated to ensuring no one else had to experience that particular hell. The journey from there to here had required every ounce of strength she possessed, had demanded she face pain she wanted to forget, had forced her to be more vulnerable than she'd ever imagined. But it had been worth it. Every cold night, every moment of fear, every time she had to choose dignity over survival, it had all led here, to this moment, to this man, to this purpose. Ella Baker had not just survived, she had transformed. And in doing so, she had helped transform the man she loved, built an organization that would transform thousands more, and proven that sometimes the greatest empires are not built on money or power, but on the simple revolutionary act of refusing to let the world break you. As the celebration continued around them, Ella leaned into Jacob and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting yourself be seen," he replied. And in that exchange, simple, profound, honest, lay the truth that would carry them through whatever came next. That healing requires vulnerability, that transformation demands courage, and that the greatest love stories are not about perfect people finding each other, but about broken people choosing to heal together. Outside, the fireworks continued to paint the sky in brilliant colors, each burst a reminder that even in darkness, beauty can be found. And inside the celebration, two people who had once believed themselves beyond redemption stood together, living proof that it's never too late to rebuild, to begin again, to choose hope over despair. Their story was just beginning, and it was going to be beautiful. The end.